Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the eDiscovery channel. Tom O'Connor here, Doug Austin there, here, there, and everywhere. We're doing the Gulf Coast mission today. Of course, I'm in New Orleans. Doug is in Houston, which we consider the Gulf Coast.
I am actually not in Houston.
Uh-oh.
I'm in Breckenridge, Colorado. So
Oh, that's right. You're on vacation. Well, forget it then.
Well, not on vacation, working here, but getting away from the
yeah.
No one goes to Breckenridge to work. You're on vacation.
Yeah. When I need to work, the first thing I think of is Colorado. Yeah, let's go.
Right, of course.
Well, I'm in the Gulf Coast, and our guest Mike McBride is just up the road in Red Stick, Louisiana, known to people outside of the local area as Baton Rouge. But you're not in Baton Rouge either, are you, Mike?
I am not. I am up in Ohio visiting, visiting friends, visiting offices, and going to see the Foo Fighters tomorrow.
Oh, well, there you go. So that is something worth talking about. That'd be more fun than anything we're going to talk about for the next 40.
For sure.
So Mike's an old colleague. Doug and I have known him for a while. He's a well-known expert, especially in the wide world of Microsoft, and especially Microsoft mysticism, by which we mean M365 eDiscovery and the big T, Teams. I got to say, though, you mentioned the law firm Mike is employed by Bricker Graydon in their Baton Rouge office, and has perhaps the coolest job title that I have come across in a long time. Mike is listed as an M365 Modern Workplace Engineer. Woo-woo. You need to get like
a fancy way of saying that if there's an M365 or a Teams attachment to it, I'm the one who's going to figure it out.
No, or you're the one who's going to get blamed.
Yeah, I'm the one. They're like, Mike, go figure that out.
Yeah, right.
And I am the Baton Rouge office is essentially my house, right? I am the Baton Rouge office. So.
Okay, there you go. There you go. So headquarters is in Ohio?
It's in Columbus, Ohio, and Cincinnati, Ohio. So the firm merged last year. So the two firms that merged were based in Cincinnati and Columbus. And there's little spotty offices around the Ohio, Northern Kentucky area. They let me work from Louisiana, so I'm not complaining.
I just spoke with a friend who lives in southwestern Pennsylvania, and I said, "Where exactly do you live?" He said, "Well, I'm kind of down to Pennsatucky." I said, "Okay, yeah, southeast Pittsburgh, yeah, okay." So, anyways, for those of you listening in who didn't tune in for the 5-minute comedy routine, you may know, some of you may have seen, Doug and I spoke with another M365 expert last week, who was quite adamant. How many times did he mention Mike's name? Do you remember, Doug?
At least 2 or 3, I think, if not more.
Yeah, it was an uncomfortable amount. I'm not gonna
lie. Greg Buckles, we're talking about, of course, who we talked about eDiscovery and 365 and what's going on with Microsoft and Purview and things that really are too scary to even talk about. You should go listen to what he said about them. But in a follow-up, I reached out to Mike because we didn't really get to talk about Teams. That was just a whole other bucket of frogs we didn't want to jump into at the time. And Mike graciously said, "Well, I can talk about Teams." So with that, tell us about Teams, Mike. Because I should say, I don't want to speak for Doug, but as Mike and I were talking just before we started here, I know nothing about Teams, as do most of the law firms, small law firms who call me are like, what's with this Teams thing? Do I need it? And then Microsoft had some sort of a conference, I think an internal or a user conference a month or so ago. And there were all these press releases coming about Teams, and I'm reading them, and I didn't even understand what they said. Once I got past Teams, it was like, yeah, all right. So, Mike,
no, Teams
is yours.
Teams is a really nice, really useful collaboration platform. Now, does that mean it's wonderful and always makes me feel joy when I use it? No. It's still technology. And there are still things about it that make me go, ah. But it is a really powerful collaboration tool. And the thing that makes it so powerful and the thing that makes it such a struggle, right? This is the same thing, right? The thing that makes it powerful is also the thing that makes it a struggle in the legal space, records management space, security space, everything else, is that it is truly a platform, right? It is an entire environment that sits on top of your already existing M365 environment, which is hard enough to keep track of, right? But Teams really sits on top of it. And I think, when I first started looking at Teams, I was sort of tasked with how do we do eDiscovery in there? Early 2020, when those eDiscovery tools were so much worse than they are now. And my response at the time was just don't. Like just no.
So, and I'm sorry, let me interrupt. So that begs the first question. So M365 has no collaboration built in to it. So the idea was that Teams would provide the collaboration, and it sits on the top like a big dual quad positive traction Hemi carburetor.
To some extent, yeah. It's really bringing in all of the same. So for example, I know a lot of law firms use Zoom or use occasionally some technology companies, some more tech astute law firms might use something like Slack. And Microsoft really kind of, in their Microsofty way, like pulled all the different features of these different things and tried to build them into one platform, for better or worse. I'm not going to opinionate on that one. So what they did is and I like to, like with Zoom, like Zoom is a great tool for having meetings. I can do Teams chats, right? Team chats, things like that, but it doesn't have the entire like team channel structure, right? Where I can go and create a channel of a team and have all this communication and file sharing and then also pull in information from other 365 apps, right? So I can have a team that is dedicated to a project, for example, and it's going to have a place for us to have threaded conversations. It's going to have a place for us to share files. It's going to have its own dedicated OneNote where I can keep all the notes for this project. I could pull in Planner, create a plan for that project and have it appear right there in the Teams. I could pull in whiteboards. I could pull in SharePoint lists, right? Just everything that's out there under the sun from the M365 environment and show it all to you right there in the Teams interface. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I saw, right, as soon as we got into this and started working with clients was the lawyer would go to the custodian. And I know you and Greg talked about getting rid of the idea of custodian. I totally agree. Right. But we would do the custodian interview and be like, okay, where was the data for this project? And they would say it's in Teams.
which is it's like 10 different places, right? Teams
exactly.
is really pulling from all these different places,
Gotcha.
right?
Which means that it's in SharePoint and in Exchange and in Planner and all these other places.
Right. And it could be in several of them, right? It might be not just in one of them. It could conceivably be in multiple. But let me back up a step and interject another question. You talked about clients. So you can set up a team channel and let's just say 3 attorneys in your firm could bring in people from the client and expert witnesses. In other words, it can be outside the organization. But do those people have to have Teams?
They don't have to have licenses for Teams, but we can grant them access. And look, it's complicated enough. Like let me just say that when you start bringing in external folks, the security and the data retention gets, ratchet a few times, right? Because now you've got to worry about their accounts getting hacked and just all of the implications of that. So there's a lot going on when you look at Teams just in terms of setting it up and making, and again, that's the kind of decision, right? The reason that so many people are afraid of Teams and haven't rolled it out, especially in the law firm space, is that you've got to make those decisions, right? Are you going to let people externally come in here? And if you are, how are you going to handle those accounts, right? How are you going to set up the team? How are you going to let people talk to each other? How long, what's a record in Teams versus what is not a record in Teams? What's discoverable in Teams, versus what is not discoverable in Teams, right? And these are all
to that point, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, Mike, but that's what I do. So to that point, let's just say we're having, let's say the three of us are in the organization, the same organization. We all have teams. We have a Teams account, and you set up a channel for us to work on this matter that we're working on. And then you want to bring in, much like, we can give somebody access to Zoom. We're going to have a call and talk about these things, and somebody comes in once. Does that cause any issues in terms of records and any issues? Name an issue.
Well, yeah. So if I invite somebody to a meeting the way you invited me to this meeting, right?
Right.
Much less concerning, because it's not, they're basically only accessing the M365 environment during the meeting.
Just
right?
the one time.
And then they're
That's
out, right? And then they're out. There are some small concerns around anything they do during that meeting. So if they're in the meeting chat typing away, that's now my data. It's not their data. It's living in my environment. Because you're the host. I'm responsible for it now. If they, disclose some sensitive information in that chat, this is my responsibility now. So there's not zero concern, but not nearly the concern you would get if you were literally bringing them into a channel to work with you.
And that was my next question. If then you want to have, so the GC, an IT person at the several people inside the company, you want to add them to the channel, that ramps up all the concerns.
Yeah, and I mean, the security around the Teams in Microsoft is pretty good. Like, I can give you access to just that single channel. I don't have to grant you any sort of wide access. But, again, understanding that by granting you access to that channel, I've granted you access to the SharePoint site that's tied to that channel. I've granted you access to any apps that have been pulled into that channel, right? So, and potentially, I've granted you access to whatever other people in that channel decide to give you access to, who may not be as astute around security. So you've got to kind of monitor that and keep an eye on what exactly is being shared with these people.
And by giving them SharePoint access, the Teams SharePoint access, they then would have access to any documents that have been shared in team meetings by channel members.
Yeah.
Not even necessarily ones in which they participated.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Well,
I mean, but what are you gonna do, right? I mean, it's part of their channel. The key is you got to make sure Microsoft is securing it in every place along the path, right? I mean, every place where they're accessing data, it's got to be, that security's got to be locked down to that level, right?
So, in comparison to, maybe not even in comparison to, because who knows, if they do it anymore. But the good old days of Novell, do you, Mike, have some sort of administrator status that allows you to monitor all that, control all that, lock it down, open it up, see who's doing what?
Yeah, generally speaking, someone has what's called global admin rights or various admin rights. In my environment, I'm not the global admin. We have network infrastructure folks who are the global admins. I'm not, but I am a Teams admin, right? Which means that everything that happens inside of Teams, I can kind of monitor and see what's going on. I can set the rules for what you can and can't do in Teams. I make certain decisions, but I can also audit what's going on, right? I can hit the audit log inside of Microsoft Purview and have it tell me everything that's been shared externally in the last week or 2 weeks, and just kind of see what's out there.
And that was my next question. Do those rights flow down? It sounds like they do. Your Teams admin flows into Microsoft 365 and Purview.
Yeah. So within M365, you've got a number of different admin roles. So again, the global admin has all of them, right? As a Teams admin, a Purview admin, right? I can get into Purview, I can get into there. But for example, I'm not an Exchange admin because I don't want to be an Exchange admin.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
this all sounds really confusing. So how do you get trained up for this, Mike? Is Microsoft providing training resources for you or anybody who's going to be an admin? Is there a certification? Is there a magic wand?
It's a magic wand, yeah, for sure. No, there's some the Microsoft Learn platform does a fairly good job, especially on the back end of what's going on in Purview and a lot of that stuff. They do a fairly good job. I think Greg mentioned Tony Redmond's book,
Yeah,
Office 365. Yeah, that I've owned that. I mean, I think it's like $50 a year for a license, and he updates it every month. Like, I have no idea how he updates it every month. I know he's got a team of people doing it. It's the best $50. Like, seriously.
Yeah. Great resource. Great resource.
There's just get it. I understand it's super long. You're not going to sit down and like read it at Starbucks or anything, but
no. But if
control find in that thing is pretty good.
Yeah, and for somebody like me who is not a certified administrator, hasn't taken that, Microsoft Learning resources, that resource, Redmond's stuff and Greg's stuff, that roadmap that he puts up, which I love. I didn't know this. Microsoft throws it out there and then takes it down after, what did he say, 60 days?
I think that's right. Yeah. So
the roadmap is always an interesting. I've seen some stuff on the roadmap marked as done and been like,
yeah,
it's not in there.
Sure.
Yeah. Or it's like the Purview is a great example. The little button that allowed you to grab the hyperlinks that was sitting there grayed out for years. Then all of a sudden one day it's white.
Mm-hmm.
It's alive. It's alive. the electricity came. I'm sure people. I mean, like, did you get a notice about that, Mike?
I mean, personally, no. I saw it, in the message center and on the roadmap. I saw that it was coming. I think I even went and looked at the documentation. I was like, okay, this is how it works.
But the day it went
didn't
live,
do anything yet. Right?
Yeah, the day it went live, you didn't have any sort of
Yeah.
notice, like it's here.
No, that's one of the biggest.
Yeah.
One of the problems of people coming from sort of the old school software, and I'm among. I'm not, trying to. I'm as old as everybody else is.
System, man. I want to know when loose leaf binders. Tell me when you take page 6 and 7 out and insert the new one. Come on, man.
The M365 platform is so large, and there's so many moving parts that things will. The roadmap message center aren't bad, but what happens is they'll say, we're going to roll this out in June. And you're like, all right, cool. The end of June comes and you look at the roadmap, like, still rolling it out. Okay. When's it gonna hit my tenant? Like, when am I actually gonna see this? And I've been, the best case I can give you this is in previous lifetime when I was working as a consultant, we were doing a demo of what was then advanced eDiscovery before they changed the name to premium eDiscovery.
Right.
And I was in a review set looking at documents, talking to them about how you would look at documents in the review set. And a question came up about some settings and stuff. So I went out of the review set, right? Showed them where you would set those settings. And I went back in the review set and the interface changed. And the menus were all in different places.
Yeah. Yeah. Not uncommon to those of us who, Microsoft updated your system last night. Yeah, that's great. Where was that button that I used to use that it was always down? I mean, yeah, they do that. And don't even talk about Exchange, right? Yeah. Where, menus move and things are over here. Yeah. So that's good in one sense, because I'm hearing that the frustration that we have at the end user level is shared by you to a lesser degree, but still to some degree at the guys in the know level. So that's just a Microsoft thing. It's so big they can't control it. They've created a monster.
I think the description. I'm misquoting Greg on this one. I apologize, but I think he talked about, like, it'll hit everybody's tenant at a different time, right? So and you're never going to see, oh, I'm on version 10.1. Like, that doesn't exist. Right? It's all just rolling as you go along.
It's just this rolling wave. It's like a shock wave that's going down. Yeah,
Which
what did he
which
say?
doesn't give you the ability to roll back, right? I
Oh
mean,
no, oh no,
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 that's
no.
because sometimes, I mean, in software, sometimes you roll out something and it's a problem, and you'd like to have the ability to roll back, but you really
Yeah.
have to be a bit dependent on Microsoft to get enough complaints about it to say, okay, we've got a problem, we've got to roll it back, right?
What was it he said, Doug? Didn't he say something like, "We're all riding on a rocket ship, but they're building it as we're flying"?
Right, writing it, right,
Very
building
much
the
so.
rocket ship as we're in it, yes. So, right. It's
So, okay, Mike, that's great. I'm suitably scared to death now. Um,
Don't be
you know,
scared. Microsoft's got this under control, Tom. You're in safe hands.
oh, yeah, yeah,
So I'm curious, Mike, because I mean, you're a Teams admin, and obviously Teams touches a lot of different places and so forth, and M365 and what have you. Uh, is there is there kind of a small implementation that doesn't require a full-time person to actually have a Teams implementation up and running? I'm a single person company. I have
yeah.
Teams never work. The Teams app never works for me for meetings. I always have to do the browser because for whatever reason it just doesn't want me to do anything. So I'm not a big fan of Teams. But
That's fair.
is there a Teams for Dummies simple kind of version of it that people can
Yeah,
use
or think
for
about,
M365?
the five attorney firm. Um, a couple
Right.
paralegals, they don't have an IT. They might have an
They
outside.
they need a platform where they can do their quick collaboration and their meetings and what have you, and they're on M365, so Teams is a logical choice.
Mhm.
Is that a potentially workable solution,
Okay.
or are they going to run into issues because you need a level of understanding?
Okay, so what's the over under on Mike saying no?
I'm thinking Mike's saying
Oh,
you're going to need.
I've worked in eDiscovery too long. You know what the answer is going to be.
Oh,
It depends.
it depends, of course. Yes.
Yeah, no, it really does. One of the things to understand about Teams, and when I say that it's super complicated, sits on top of this huge platform, right? One of the takeaways that I would really like people to take away with that is you can keep it simple. You can have meetings and chat, maybe build out one channel, and then the rest of the complication isn't that hard, right?
Mhm.
You still have the same concerns, but you're only dealing with this very small subset of information, and it's manageable, right? It's not really hard. When I need to go do eDiscovery, there's one team, right? I don't have to be like, okay, which of the 5,000 teams is relevant here
Right.
that you get in some larger organizations. So it does, if you keep the implementation simple, use the simpler tools, don't bring in a lot of third-party apps, which really complicates things because then your data actually doesn't live in M365, right? It
Right.
lives somewhere else. Yeah, it's not bad. I run just on the side. I have my own implementation where I'm basically the only user just for testing,
Mhm.
and I can manage that. I can, I'm not doing a lot in there that is going to create a lot of risk, right? Because
Right.
I'm not inviting anybody in. I'm not, it's just a very small sort of little subset of users that I can test with and play with, and I can use it for some email, some document storage. I got some channels where I'm pulling in some information I'm keeping track of. It's not hard, right? That's not a full-time job, keeping that up to date. It's when you start kind of looking at it on a larger scale and say, okay, I want to create a team for every matter.
Mhm.
Okay, like again, you can do that, but you're taking on some responsibility for managing all of that and keeping track of all that, and deactivating old matters and getting rid of
Sure.
the stuff when you got to get rid of stuff and all that.
Right.
You're taking on that level of responsibility. We start adding more people in, you start adding apps. Again, it creates a lot of opportunity for collaboration. There's some really great tools out there, but the more stuff you add, the more complicated it gets.
Sure.
So
So,
go ahead, Doug. Go ahead.
well, because one of the things I'm interested in as well, obviously, you're responsible for Teams at a law firm, and you're using it for matters and things like that. Organizations out there are using it for projects, whatever the thing case may be, and they may have lots of different projects, and then litigation hits, and some of this data is going to be discoverable. So I'm interested about some of the considerations there and some of the challenges you've seen and some of the ways around those challenges challenges from a standpoint of Teams discovery? And are you even seeing that much Teams discovery yet? Because we still haven't really seen any and much case law related to Teams data that I've seen so far. And I read a lot of cases. Obviously, Tom reads as close to as many as I do. So I'm just curious. About
nobody reads as many as you do, Doug, because it's well known. It's well known in the blogger community that you're an alien.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I'm curious about just kind of the discovery challenges.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you were an admin for an organization and they got hit with litigation, what would be some of the things you'd be wrestling with?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And you're right. I mean, first of all, I have not seen a ton of case law around Teams. I've not seen a ton of requests around Teams. I don't know if that's because even the plaintiff side doesn't really understand what Teams is either, right? Potentially.
Maybe.
On the flip side of that, like I haven't personally seen it, but I've, in litigation support eDiscovery, I've worked a lot of employment cases, especially around harassment and things like that. And I can see it from here, right? I can
Sure.
Harassing people in Teams. Yeah, that's probably a thing somewhere, right? And you're probably going to need to collect that data. Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, let's ask a practical question here. Let's say you are an organization like Doug is talking about, and you've got M365 and you've got Purview and you've got Teams. If you put a litigation hold into effect in Purview, which, and correct me if I'm wrong here, isn't that tenant based?
Yeah.
So if you name a tenant in your Microsoft 365 Purview to put a hold on, is it going
you
to
wouldn't put a hold on the whole tenant, right? You would put a hold on specific pieces.
Okay, so you're answering the first question.
Yeah.
You have to tell it what you want from the tenant.
Yeah. And that's really a good example of a challenge with Teams, because I can't say go put Teams on hold.
That was my next question. If you do that, what does it do with Teams? Can you tell it go get the Teams SharePoint for this tenant? So
yeah, so I can point it to the SharePoint. I could point it to like the group mailbox for channels. I could point it to the user mailboxes for the users who are involved in a group chat, right? So where that data, again, I've got to understand where that data lives.
Sidebar, counsel, sidebar. Yeah. Aren't there, or isn't it possible to create specific mailboxes just for the teams?
No, they live in your normal mailbox.
So if they're a team member, doesn't matter.
Well, again, take a step back to the different parts of Teams, right? You do have the Teams channels, but you also have what's known as just chat, right? And that's where, again, if 3 of us are in that organization, I could just send a message to you.
Yeah,
right? Outside of any channel. Outside of any channel, just quick chat message.
Right. But
those
email is just handled by my email.
Yeah. So, but the compliance copies of those chats, right? The things that are discoverable live in the substrate of your Exchange mailbox.
Gotcha.
Right. And so that's where it really becomes key in understanding where these things are, because if you're an E5 licensee, right, it's a little bit easier because E5, the eDiscovery tools and the data retention, they point you to places. They tell you where stuff is. If you're an E3 licensee using standard eDiscovery, it doesn't tell you. You've got to go. You've got to know where to go.
Well, and that's my question. So let's say you're the administrator and Doug and I are in the organization, and you put a hold on my stuff, and you even name some of the stuff in Teams. But Doug is part of the team, and things are being saved other places because Doug's involved. In other words, are they slipping through the crack if you don't make sure to put a hold on every member of the team, of the channel?
Yeah, and again, it really gets into that question of, and this becomes, and I've worked with people who really put in very, very strict policies, right? Where if you're conducting business, you do that in a channel. You never do that in chat. You want to talk about going out to lunch? Have a chat.
Right.
You want to talk about business? You do that in a channel. So we know to go get those group mailboxes. And they put in really strict policies. And I've worked with places that even, for example, have a like 1 or 2 day auto deletion policy for chat. And you just don't even get to keep it. Right? You have your chat and it's done. It's not business.
Is there a way to grab that chat?
Yeah, for about a week or two, there's generally a way to grab it. Because it when we say, so for example, if I have like a 24-hour auto deletion policy, that means if I go back 24 hours later and try to respond to something, it's not there. It's gone. But
so now let's go
because
back
that
to
message
Doug's,
lives in Exchange, it's still got to go through the whole deletion process.
now let's go
So
back
it's
to
hanging
Doug's
around for a while.
question.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Doug's question about how easy is this to do for a small organization?
Not easy. Well, and so last year, in the newsletter I write for M365, I had done an entire newsletter dedicated to basically, hey, if you're a small business on an E3 license and you have to do litigation, to put it bluntly, here are all the ways you're screwed. Here are all the things you just cannot do. Wow. With an E3 license. And I did it at a time, and I know, looking back when I read it, I'm like, man, this sounds like a Microsoft marketing piece to up your license to E5, and I really didn't mean for it to sound like that. But what, in context, it was about the same time last year that Microsoft had, and I don't remember the details of this, but there was an email hack breach that had gotten into a lot of M365 environments. And Microsoft had fixed it, and they put out this whole remediation plan that said, if you want to look out for this, you got to keep track of your audit logs. You got to go back so far in your audit logs. And a lot of their E3 customers said, hey, wait a minute. You say to go back and look at the audit logs, but our licensing only allows us to go back 90 days.
Ooh.
And Microsoft said, yeah, you're right. And they relented and gave people 180 days for free. So when I wrote this, my thought was, hey, Microsoft, while we're relenting on stuff.
Right.
Well, I got
people
you
about how screwed I am trying to do eDiscovery here.
Need to do their jobs, right? It's not just at the top license, but in the lower license. That's one of the things. Yeah.
So,
and obviously the cloud collection is one of those things that, we've talked about with a couple of folks, and the fact that cloud collection piece is in the E5, not in the lower levels. So.
Yeah, exactly. Your favorite topic of discussion there, Doug, your linked attachments, right? If I'm an E3 customer, there's no way for me to do that, right? It's impossible. And even, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I thought they had just announced within the last week that you can grab one version with the lower levels now. In other words, you can grab a link, but only at the time you put the hold in.
I don't think it works. It currently doesn't work automatically. And that may change that, but currently I have to kind of know where it is to go get it.
So nothing you can automate then, right?
No.
Okay. So even if like some eDiscovery, company or some or platform said, hey, we've got this, it's going to work. It won't work unless without Microsoft's cooperation. They're not giving you the capability for a tool to link in, to connect in and automate that collection, right?
Yeah, a lot of those tools are probably using the Graph API to do the collection.
Sure.
And as far as I know, you still need an E5 license to use the Graph API to automate those collections.
Right.
So
makes sense.
Yeah, Microsoft licensing changes almost as often as the platform does. So by the time you push this out, this might be outdated.
We could obviously talk about this forever, and we're going to be running short on time here. But Mike, so what's the compelling reason to go to T? You said at the beginning it was great, it's wonderful, it does all this cool stuff, and now we talk about it really sounds like it's kind of a pain in the ass, not to administer so much, but I guess like everything else in eDiscovery, to make sure you're getting everything. And maybe it's just, that's just the nature of the beast, right? It wasn't designed to be a tool to help you do that. Again, I come back to the 5-attorney firm calls me up and says, what should I do? It sounds like what you're saying is, don't try to do too much. use Teams, create one channel for the stuff that you're going to do in the firm, and monitor that.
Yeah,
That's
keep track of it, right? Don't let it get past your ability to keep track of what's going on. I think one of the classic sort of, and I hesitate to say mistakes, because let's face it, in March of 2020, we all just sort of made stuff up as we were going, right? And I think a lot of places pushed out Teams because they needed something, right? People were all working from home. They needed some sort of technology to let them collaborate. Teams was sitting right there. Go, right?
gotcha.
And they did so without turning on any sort of limitations, right? So essentially, everybody in the environment could do anything they wanted in Teams. And I know I worked with one client at about 6 months, 8 months, 9 months after that, who had come to us because they had just said, here, go use Teams. And then their eDiscovery and data retention folks were like, so now we have 4,000 teams. A non-insignificant number of them are named test. And we don't know which ones are still being used, which ones have important data on them, which ones are active, who's in them, right? Because they just sort of threw it open and said, go, right? Just go use Teams. And that is a really good way to lose that perspective, right? And to lose that, now I don't know. Now when you say, I need to discover what was going on in Teams, I have no idea what's going on in Teams, right? And when you reach that point, from eDiscovery, from data security, you're like, I have talked to people, I'm not a cybersecurity expert by any means, but I've talked to people, I've worked with people in that environment, and one of their important messages is you better know where your data is, and you better know what it is.
Right.
Because otherwise you can't even tell if you've been breached.
Sure.
Right.
Well, and with Teams having data all over the place, it's probably even more important than any other platform, because it is so hard to understand if you don't get on top of it in advance.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like when I look at rolling out Teams, I will do an initial sort of analysis of like, all right, here's the base level of Teams. Here's where the data is going. Do we have policies in place for how we handle data in SharePoint and OneDrive and Exchange and potentially a couple other places, right? And then we say, all right, now we want to add some apps. All right, let's look at each app individually, right? Where does it store data, right? Because at the end of the day, apps store data wherever the person who wrote the app decided to store data, right?
Of course.
Right, it's not necessarily going to make sense. And from an eDiscovery perspective, it might be a terrible place, but
right.
That is, and so you go through those tests and say, okay, where does this store data, right? And I do that very simply. I create data, right? So I will go out and be like, all right, where does this get stored? I'm going to write something, put some text in it. I'm going to put a code in there that is unique to this document or this chat or whatever. And then I'm going to go into Purview and I'm going to search for it and say, okay, where is it? And if I can't find it, if I get no hits back, then I'm like, okay, it's in an Azure database, it's somewhere that is not accessible to my eDiscovery tools. Noted, right? Do I have a plan to get that if I need it?
Right.
And really, it sounds super simple, but I'm not going to lie. There are so many moving pieces that doing those tests is a slog.
Yeah. So where, if anywhere, can an end user go to learn how to do all this stuff?
I would start with Microsoft Learn. I really would. Time was that if you were a developer, you could get a free developer account and get a free tenant set up to play around with and stuff. They've since limited that to people who actually have, actual code virtual machine licenses, and you can't just sign up for those anymore. You got to pay. You got to be somebody. Which is unfortunate, because that was really, one of the ways that I learned that the best was being able to say, here's an environment that I have complete control over. Let me play with it, knowing that if I broke it, I can just get a new one.
Yeah.
Right? I wasn't breaking anybody's production environment. So if you have access, if you work at a Microsoft partner, especially, they will give you access to those things. And I think that's, take advantage of that and go, right? So, so definitely, if you can get your hands on an environment like that, that's a really good way to learn. Microsoft Learn stuff is pretty good. Ask around. There are people out there who do this for a living. They may seem really stressed and busy because we are.
Ask around, like, down at the bus stop.
Yeah, down at the bus stop. No, I mean, come to ILTA, right? There's
So
a
that's
number
a
of
great
panels
segue.
on.
I was
There are a
just
number
going to
of
say
panels on M365 and Teams at ILTA. I'm speaking on one.
that was exactly where I was going to go with that was, if you want to learn about some of this stuff, go to a good conference, and ILTACon is coming up August 11th, 12th.
Yeah, 11th through 15th.
In fabulous
Nashville.
downtown Nashville, Tennessee. And so, Mike, tell us, you just mentioned you're speaking on a panel about Teams. Can you give us the elevator pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. So our session is relatively early in the week, Tuesday morning, and we're kind of setting it. We've named it as setting the stage, and just going to talk a lot about where data is stored, why you care about where it's stored, what you can do about where it's stored. We're going to talk a lot about who you need to work with, right? Because I have always been of the impression that as an IT guy, our data retention policies are not mine to decide. Right? Our privacy policies are not mine to decide. That's a business decision. So how do we get everybody involved? Who needs to be involved in those things? Talk a little bit about that, and then setting the stage for the other sessions that come later. I know there's a session specifically about eDiscovery and Purview.
Okay.
There's a session about compliance around M365. So there are a number of, and of course, there's going to be a number of sessions around Copilot, which frankly just added to the compliance problems. Not problems. The nice thing about Copilot is that the data is stored very much the same way that Teams data is.
Okay, interesting. So are you speaking on the "Dude, Where's My Data" panel?
That was the original title. Yeah. So
okay. Oh, it's been changed.
Yeah, we changed it a little bit.
All right, fair enough.
It felt like it was a dated reference to some of the younger folks. I was like, all right, that's cool. I got it.
Yeah, I got it. So come on. Okay, well, that sounds great, and I'm glad to hear that there's sort of a staggered series of sessions that will keep that discussion going. Because, like I said, ILTACon's great, but it's a very technically sophisticated audience. Obviously, it's IT people, it's the tech staff, it's litigation support managers. Those are not the people I'm getting phone calls from.
Yeah.
And people are puzzled. They want a good collaborative tool. They've heard that it's very powerful for some of the reasons you said. It's just how do I learn about it? How do I how do I dip my toe in the pool and figure out how to take those first couple of strokes with the thing.
And like anything, I think the more you kind of get into it, like I said, start small, keep it tight, keep a tight ship on it, keep it tight, make sure you're in control, and then add things incrementally. I think that really helps tremendously with not getting in over your head. And especially if you do get involved in litigation, you're like, okay, I know where the data is, like I know what we have, I understand what we've done here, I understand what our policies are, so I'm not coming in and going, what in the heck is this? Right. Which I think, Tom, if it's somebody in your position who's working, outside of an organization, if I were to come in and be like, all right, help us do eDiscovery in Teams now, and no one knew what was what in Teams, that's it's probably a lot of billable time for you, but
right.
Well, there's always that. Yeah.
But
no, you want to be able to come in. I want to be able to come in and offer solutions, and I can offer that solution going forward. That doesn't always vary, as Mike, with the matter in front of you. It doesn't necessarily help you with that. It helps you to set policies and procedures going forward so that this mess doesn't happen again. But this mess is still,
and I think, you make the evaluations based on your risk, right? Do you want to go to E5 and have a simpler collection process and do all the things that you can't do in E3? Again, if you've got a lot of litigation risk,
money and a bit of money too.
And It's not an insignificant amount of money. This is
yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's the real problem. So.
And that's make that valuation, right? Is it worth it to have that safety net behind you for these situations?
Right.
And look, eDiscovery is just part of that difference, right? There are a whole bunch of other security and sensitivity tools built into that E5 license.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
you know, make the big picture valuation. Again, not to be selling you this because it's overkill for a lot of people. Let's be honest.
Of course.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
But
okay.
You know, you find yourself in $1 billion litigation, you might not seem as much like overkill anymore.
Yeah, right. Well, Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Definitely,
and,
definitely interesting and enlightening for sure.
Yeah, and look forward to seeing you in Nashville in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
And to all of our listeners, anybody who's going to be in Nashville for ILTACon, please track us down. Doug and I will be scurrying around with notebooks, taking notes, pictures, recordings, and putting it all in our team channel so we can lose it.
And occasionally, Tom will be outside smoking a cigar. So,
not so occasionally. Yeah. Not so occasionally, my friend.
That's where you want to catch Tom. That's
right. Yeah, that's when you could get the real scoop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting because several of my normal cigar smoking buddies have dropped out. I mean, Henry Dicker isn't on the circuit anymore. He was a big smoker. I don't know if the Messing brothers will be there or not. They typically are. So Shimmy and Rocky are always good smoke. And I forget to add, did Greg say he was going to be there? Greg Buckles? Probably not.
I don't remember him saying he was, and I don't know that he's typically prioritized ILTA. So
yeah,
I don't think so.
So I got to recruit a whole bunch of new cigar smokers, man. That's all there is.
There you go. Well, get to work then.
Yeah,
I will work on that. Thanks again, folks. And Mike, thanks again so much.
Yeah, no problem.